Okay, so a little bit about me and my background as far as this stuff is concerned. Um, I was fortunate enough to go to an elementary um, called Marcus Garvey, which was based in Los Angeles, California, in the inner city. And after I went to that school, I went to another black school, black elementary, that was an accelerated learning program called W.B. Du Bois Academic Institute. So I've always been somebody who's been brought up to be socially conscious, to ask questions, to not take things at face value, to give a side eye to things that don't make sense, right? So as a little kid, that was always me. And then being the youngest of four brothers, it was always that I was kind of forced to have to grow up faster because everybody was older, which, to me is a benefit. Um, so I had the opportunity to graduate high school at 13 years old because of my comprehension and my reading level was so high. But my dad thought that was a little excessive. So I ended up graduating high school at 16 years old because he took me out of that school and sent me to a public school because he wanted me to see how the other kids were doing it. So I went to Crozier Junior High School in the eighth grade at 12 years old when a lot of those kids were 14, 15 years old. And lo and behold, I realized that they were way behind academically. And not because they weren't smart, but that's just public education. Like I was on an accelerated learning curve. So in the eighth grade, they were just learning the capitals to the states. Well, I knew that stuff when I was 4 or 5 years old, right? So going into high school and ultimately college, I lost a little zest for academics because I'm like, well, everybody's not learning the same thing I'm learning, so it kind of got boring to me. Okay? So I say that to say that the seeds of questioning, uh, being socially conscious, were already planted as a child. So I grew up as a young adult, knowing my history. I knew slavery wasn't the beginning of my history. I knew about, and I hate using the word ancient kings and queens back in the day, but for lack of better terminology in this moment, I knew about the kings and queens of Africa and ancient civilizations. We studied that stuff when we were kids. So there was nothing anybody could tell me that my history started as a slave. I knew that wasn't the case. I knew that there were some Africans that sold slaves to Europeans. A small percentage of it, but I was aware of that, right? And I'm very aware about slavery and the slave trade and the ills and the atrocities and Jim Crow and the Willie Lynch letters and the busting of the black family. Like I know all that stuff, right? Um, so, but at the same time, wanting to believe in America. I mean, Martin Luther King and civil rights and integration, like even though these things have happened, it's like you still want to believe. It's like not growing up with a parent, and but that parent is around, and they constantly disappoint you, and they tell you they're gonna be there, and they don't show up. It's like as angry as we are, as hurt as we're feeling, there's still that small piece of us that desires that person to come through. Because it's our father, it's our mother. Like, it's like, just as a little kid, you want that love from your parent. And for me, that's kind of how it was for America. Like, even though I'm turning on the news and I'm studying this stuff, there's still that piece of me that's like, I, what they're saying has to be true. That somebody there has to really mean what they're saying. That we can all be equal. That it doesn't have to be racism. That your take of the American dream is available to you. Like my piece of the American pie. Like you know, this is the country. You know what I mean? Like, irregardless, that's not even a word. Regardless of how this country was established through the murdering of Native Americans and the enslavement of black people and minorities since this country's inception. Even still, I was like, yo, come on, that was back then. This is now. Like, you know, if you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and I still believe a lot of that stuff. But I've gotten to the place where I don't look for it from government anymore. And I'll tell you when that happened. And I've always been, like I said, somebody who's questioned, you know, like AIDS and certain diseases. And I'm like, how do stuff just be popping up out of nowhere? And then you read about the Tuskegee experiment, you know, where they were basically like injecting, you know, these guys with syphilis. You know what I mean? Like, and even as a kid, I don't know if some of you guys remember the Atlanta child murders. This was like early 80s. And even back then, we were hearing stories about these bodies were being found without plasm in their blood, as if they were being experimented on, and the plasma from the blood was being taken out. So that was back then. You know what I mean? So, you know, not to say it was true, false, I don't know, but I've always been somebody that's kind of like raised an eyebrow at the official story. But there's that little piece of me, that little kid inside of me. It's like, man, people are innately good. Like, I just want the truth. You know what I mean? Like, you just want it.